Welcome back to another wonderful episode of the 4Q podcast. My name is Sheena Shui. I am the owner of Savasana Collective, holistic psychology, social work and coaching, and Therapist VA, where we help therapists and health professionals really kickstart their businesses and private practices, both of which sponsor this episode. So let's get into today's episode, which is around Johann Hari's book, Stolen Focus, and what are my thoughts around this and ADHD and anxiety. Now, I want to preface this episode that I'm mushing together ADHD and anxiety, and the reason being is that for those of you who've been following me for a while, you'll understand this concept, but a lot of the symptoms that we put into one category and another category and one diagnosis and another diagnosis overlap a lot. So the symptoms in the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistic Manual, which most psychologists, social workers, counselors, psychiatrists use, the symptoms have 80% overlap. And a lot of symptoms between ADHD, anxiety, even depression, bipolar, overlap quite a lot. And things like forgetfulness and having highs and lows and having bursts of energy and, overthinking social interactions and having avoidance around certain things and running out of energy and hyperfocus can be attributed to either generalized anxiety, social anxiety, or ADHD. Which for me personally as a therapist, I work from the place that a lot of these things have been developed through trauma or attachment or our environment. And that's what Johann Hari really gets into in this book, is around how our environment is stealing our focus. It's incredible in terms of laying it out in layman's terms, like in everyday people speak, how our environment is stealing our attention and our connection with each other, which is, it's so sad. And so this is his latest book, but in his other books, he's touched on anxiety and depression and why we all have it from an environmental perspective. He touches on the addiction and how people with addictions, it's because of their environment. And again, trauma and attachment and all of that stuff. And if you don't know what I'm talking about there, I mean, when I say trauma, any event that has left a significant impact on you throughout your life. It could have happened recently, like workplace bullying in the last few years that has left you feeling dysregulated and anxious and sort of unable to connect with people, feeling second-guessing workplace relationships and all of that sort of thing, and feeling anxious about work, all of that. That could be a form of trauma that's more recent, or it can be the things that we think about that are more longer term that happen in childhood. So experiencing bullying at school constantly. It can be being physically assaulted, sexually assaulted. It could be having parents who were just emotionally abusive, and it can be emotional neglect. That is, your parents provided everything physically, but they weren't there for you emotionally. They weren't there in a caring or loving sense, more of just a ticking off the duties, or even a narcissistic sense of just they wanted you to look good in return for them, but they weren't emotionally as invested. So that is trauma. And then attachment, again, sinks into that, is around what is your relationship like with your parents. That affects your brain development and how you see the world, how you interact with the world, how everything works out for you. It's a huge part of our life, how you interact with relationships. Do you think the world is safe? So trauma and attachment. And then, so in this book, Stolen Focus, Johann Hari is talking about how so many of us have the symptoms of ADHD and anxiety and what's contributing to that. And the things that I found the most interesting is what he called surveillance capitalism, which is he talked to many of the people that were in The Social Dilemma, if anybody has seen that on Netflix, but basically how social media is crafted to hold our attention, whether that's good or bad. It's crafted in a way to hold our attention and keep us on the platform for as long as possible. And so in his book, he talked to the developers of these apps and how, the infinite scroll, how when you scroll to the bottom of a page, it just reloads more things to hold you there. But one of the most controversial things is that on Facebook and even other media platforms, what they've done is they figured out that they are going to show you news articles, posts from people that, as I said, keep you on the app the longest. But what they have found is that the algorithm is showing you things that outrage you. So what seems to keep our attention the longest is things that actually make us angry, agitated, so really far right things or far left things really get us angry and agitated, and that's what keeps us on the app. But of course, scrolling these apps, in the book again, it talks about some ridiculous number. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but our brains are not used to seeing this amount of information. And so the analogy that he uses is the newspaper. Even in sort of medieval, agricultural times in our human development, our brain development, evolutionary perspective, we had sort of local news, newspapers. That was a thing, and it was a limited amount of information during one part of your day. So for a lot of people, it was getting it in the morning, set amount. You could not receive more information than what was in the newspaper or what was said to you at that time. And that was it. You weren't thinking about it all day, every day. But with Twitter and, news.com.au or wherever you are, news.com, all the stuff coming at us, we're getting the equivalent to hundreds of newspapers worth of information a day, even though our brains were not evolved to take that amount of information. And so you can imagine our brain is like a huge filing cabinet, sorting away information as it comes in. We are so exhausted from the information coming in that, of course, it's hard to pay attention. And then we're so zoned out that we go, what's going to help me zone out is another app. So you might get all this information on Facebook or Instagram, and then in the evening you go, I just want to scroll YouTube, or I just want to scroll TikTok, which again, these short bursts of stimulus, are just stealing our attention and making us anxious, making our attention just obliterate, regardless of what genetics you have, regardless of what upbringing you have, regardless of how healthy your lifestyle has. We're all getting our brains hijacked, our attention hijacked. And so as a therapist, I cannot even tell you how exponentially it's grown that people want to get an ADHD diagnosis. But is that the case, or is it that our environment is making all of us have attention issues? All of us feel anxious, depressed, sort of all over the place, burnt out. And yet we just want to individualize it like there's something wrong with me. It must be my genetics. It must be that unresolved trauma. And don't get me wrong, I do actually believe that plays a percentage to what you're going through. But again, if a flower doesn't bloom, do we blame the flower or its environment? I know that's that cliche, example, but it's so important. It's so vital to remember this and think of this rather than blaming yourself. And so this book, the surveillance capitalism, coming back to that, is that Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, like all of these big social media outlets are using this information and surveilling us, for data. Data is the new sort of currency, they believe, in the world. And so it's so valuable to artificial intelligence and basically selling us stuff. So the more sort of data points they have on us. So Sheena likes this and she doesn't like this, and she tends to watch these articles or watch these videos and she doesn't do this, is so valuable to artificial intelligence companies and to advertising companies that that data can be used in so many different ways for so many different uses. So these companies are making money from surveilling us, getting our data, but also constantly sending us advertising. And what's really sad, and one of the most crucial things I remember from this book, is Johann Hari talking to these, coders and producers of these social media networks, and them saying it would be so easy to change the codes for Facebook that it actually would encourage human connection rather than hijack it. So right now, it makes more money for you being on the app than connecting with people. So it actually makes you avoid connecting with people and spend more money connecting on the apps, even though they go under social media as if like they were meant to connect through it. But what the coders have said is that it would be so easy to change the code so that, let's say, you actually feel like socializing with people. You could change your status to open to seeing people or wanting to see people and see who's around or see who else would be free and actually connecting with people. That's just one example, but these apps could actually be used to connect us face to face for human interaction off the online medium in so many different ways. But if they do that, it doesn't benefit them as much, and it would be a complete shift of the model. But if they did that and we all paid sort of 50 cents a month to access Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or whatever, then they wouldn't have to hijack our attention anymore. The whole app would be based on us connecting with each other in real life. And they could make just as much money because there's billions of us users compared to the hundreds of thousands of advertisers. So they could do it, but they won't, because it would be a large piece of work, but there would be ways around it. And so if the government actually enforced this, because it can see that our brains are changing because of this, wouldn't that be a miracle? And so if you're out there and you're beating yourself up that you feel anxious or distracted or you're burnt out or you feel like you just can't focus or you're just not feeling yourself, remember that our environment is not conducive to mental health, and all of these apps and social media are doing this. So what can you do? What's the big takeaway after reading this book? Well, I think it's really important to set boundaries around social media. One of the big things that I do, and I'm no golden child, I have 2 businesses I run on social media, so I am on there. But what I do really make a point of is that if I'm going to the park with my kids, phone is absolutely away. Unless I'm taking a photo, I do not get it out. It's on silent. I do not need to be contacted. If I need to be contacted, I might put the volume up, but it is always no phones during that time, no social media at all. I also always take a social media break, and Johann even recommends this in the book, just to decompress, deconnect, really understand how your brain works without all this stimulus constantly. Make sure you get out in nature. Nature rewires our brain back to its natural state because obviously from an evolutionary perspective, we started in nature, we farmed nature, we connected with nature. It's such a reset, which is why naturally we gravitate towards landscapes and water, all of those things from an evolutionary perspective. And what I would say is make the effort at least once a week to connect with people face to face, without phones, without distractions, just really talking, eye to eye contact. because that does so many neural things for your brain. There's neural pathways connecting, endorphin shooting, there's, endorphins flowing, dopamine acting. There's so many benefits to connecting with other human beings through eye contact. I can't even begin to unpack that here in this episode, but do that. So I hope that you got a lot out of it. I would 100% recommend the book. It's been a year since it came out, a year since I've read it. I read it in like 3 days, which never happens for me. I never get into books that much. And I had a newborn at the time, but I was consumed with this book. It's such an easy read. He writes so easily and beautifully. So I definitely recommend it. And I can't wait to hear your thoughts on it. Leave me your thoughts on this episode or this book. And again, if you want to connect with myself in any of my services, please feel free to reach out at savasanacollective.com or therapistva.net. Okay, wishing you all the best. Have a wonderful week, and I will catch you next week on the 4Q podcast. You take care.